Welcome back to Classical Mythology. In this module, we will be looking at the heroines, the female counterparts to the Greek heroes. Now, alongside the classical heroes, we find the heroines, and women are no less important to the overall classical mythological tradition. But they too have their basic characteristics. In the first place, the heroine is mortal and has died, just like their male counterparts. The heroine has also performed extraordinary deeds, but ones that are also morally ambiguous. So like the gods and like the heroes generally, they are neither purely good or purely bad. The heroine has often died prematurely under mysterious or violent circumstances, but continues to be venerated and worshipped at a tomb or grave site. In many instances, the heroine is made immortal through their reputation and ongoing tradition of storytelling. In addition to women, infants and children can also gain historic heroic status under certain circumstances, particularly if they too have died prematurely or in an unusual setting. Heroine stories are often focused on reproduction or vengeful spirits, and they too were subjected to localized cults and ritual worship. Often, however, in connection to male counterparts or these are known as companion heroines. Few of the heroines are worshipped completely independently, but they too have both vertical traditions, that is, variations of the same episode, as well as horizontal traditions that fit a linear narrative framework. While heroines do appear in epic poetry, such as Penelope, the wife of Odysseus in the Iliad, they are more prominently featured in Athenian tragedy. Several of these works focus on female figures. Euripides in particular wrote plays that feature women prominently. Now, one well-known example of a heroine is, of course, Helen, the daughter of Leda and Zeus. Those are characters we met earlier in the semester. She's also the sister of Clytemnestra, who is the wife of Agamemnon, fathered by Leda's mortal husband. Helen has twin brothers, the so-called Dioscuri, Castor and Pollux, who also are worshipped and have their own religious cult. She was renowned for her extraordinary beauty and goddess-like qualities, and was abducted multiple times, first by Theseus as a child and later by the Trojan prince Paris. In some versions, the Trojan prince Paris takes her off to the city of Troy, but in other versions, merely a likeness of her is taken and she spends the Trojan War in Egypt. When the war is over, she is reunited with her rightful husband Menelaus. After her death, she and her husband are sent to the Isle of the Blessed, like the other heroes. So, once again, variant traditions on a very central story in the Greek epic tradition. Helen's sister Clytemnestra is heroic in her own right, but far more infamous. As the wife of King Agamemnon, who leads the Trojan expedition, she is also the mother of Iphigenia, Electra, and Orestes. Clytemnestra is depicted in the dramatic trilogy by Sophocles known as the Oresteia, where she murders her husband after his return from Troy. This is an act of revenge for the fact that Agamemnon had sacrificed their daughter Iphigenia in order to allow the ships to sail off to war at the beginning of the Trojan conflict. Later in the trilogy, she's depicted as a vengeful spirit. We also have the figure of Hecuba. She's the queen of Troy and the wife of King Priam. She's the mother of 19 sons, among whom are Paris, the abductor of Helen, as well as Hector, the great Trojan warrior. She is depicted in the Iliad as a suffering and vengeful mother. In the play of Euripides called The Trojan Women, the fate of the women of Troy is explored in some detail. Many are claimed by the Greek heroes as concubines and slaves, including her own daughter Cassandra. Hecuba is heroic in her capacity to endure suffering. So she's not unlike Oedipus, where he's an example of a hero that part of his heroism comes from the level of suffering that he endured during his lifetime. But hers is also a story of extreme violence. Learning that one of her sons was killed by his guardian Polymestor, she murders his sons and blinds him. A prophecy foretells that she will be turned into a wild dog. Such heroine stories often involve the murder of children. This is a common trope in such mythological narratives. Now, I spoke recently about the idea of the hero's journey, this notion that there's a sort of story archetype that lies behind many of the tales told in mythology about the male heroes. And this is a very well-established sort of narrative pattern that is observed in all kinds of different forms of mythological storytelling. But some scholars have wondered, is there a similar pattern lying underneath the stories of the heroines? Is there another sort of narrative archetype at play? And one of the people that has advocated for this sort of idea is Marianne Yazevsky, who has tried to articulate the traits of a female hero. And according to her, and this is based on the comparison of multiple stories involving heroines, the parents of the heroine are either royal or divine. That's not particularly unusual. That's the case also with the heroes. They are often related. This too is kind of standard in Greco-Roman storytelling. Her conception and birth are mysterious. Little is known of her childhood. She is renowned for her beauty and her charm. So this is the kind of initial source of her fame and reputation. So the same idea of the kleos is at play. This is how the heroes achieve immortality and sort of a kind of afterlife. She uses men to advance her interests in the various narratives, particularly involving romantic relationships and sexual encounters. She is married and has children, as well as additional lovers. Her child succeeds her in some fashion, and generally she comes to perform some sort of typically male role within society. So there's a kind of transgression of gender boundaries. The story may involve her establishing laws, although generally her actions tend to be morally ambiguous, like the heroes broadly. There's what is called an Andromeda theme of rescue, which is resolved ultimately by either deception, treachery, or an untimely death. Her death, however, is often uneventful and possibly unknown. So whereas the male heroes often reach the kind of pinnacle of their heroic exploits and the apex of their narrative arc through a glorious death, for the heroine it's more reputation achieved through her actions during her lifetime. It's these things that are remembered. like in the case of Medea, kind of acts of extreme vengeance and violence. Similarly, with the Clytemnestra, they aren't particularly remembered for their quote unquote death scenes, but what they did during their lives. Now, another important heroic figure that I want us to take a special look at is the figure of Antigone. Now, one thing to keep in mind is the fact that ancient Greek women weren't as able to travel as their male counterparts, or therefore they couldn't generally make heroic journeys. The whole, archetype of the hero's journey is based on the hero's ability to go out into the world and have these adventures. Ancient Greek women are far more restricted in their movements, and they are primarily confined to the household and to some degree the civic space. So female heroes are often seen as attempting to understand the world and achieve moral goals more on the domestic front. They are figures that sometimes expose tensions in society or comment on important social issues. So their heroism is based on qualities such as intellect, courage, and persistence, as opposed to the slaying of beasts or feats of strength, etc. So one example of this sort of heroine is Antigone, who's the daughter of Oedipus and Jocasta. She has two brothers, Eteocles and Polynices, who, after Oedipus's death, rule the city of Thebes jointly, alternating on an annual basis. Eteocles, however, decides that he no longer wants to share power and expels his brother from the city. Polynices then attacks the city, and in the ensuing conflict, both brothers are killed. When a new king takes the throne, who is Antigone's uncle, Creon, he refuses to bury Polynices, forbidding anyone to do so on the pain of death. Antigone, however, sister of Polynices, defies this order and is caught. She argues that the authority of divine law, that is the right of Polynices to have a proper burial, supersedes the human law of Creon. And she sheds light on Creon's abuse of his kingly authority, arguing that it would be immoral and an offense to the gods not to bury her brother. King Creon, however, won't relent and orders for her to be walled up in a tomb, but at the last minute changes his mind. However, when he opens the tomb, he finds that Antigone has hanged herself. Creon's son Haemon, who happens to be Antigone's fiancé, then commits suicide after he learns of his fiancé's death. So in this way, Antigone is heroic both for her convictions in life, but also as a kind of martyr for a cause. We'll revisit this idea of martyrdom connected to a new type of hero in the next module. So Antigone has also been the subject of a dramatic depiction in the play by Sophocles, the Antigone. And in recent years, there was a very interesting and I think important reinterpretation of this play in the light of events in the city of Ferguson, where there was a lot of controversy around in the US around race-related issues, policing, violence, etc. In the video section, you'll find both a short documentary on the staging of the Antigone in Ferguson, as well as a video of the full performance. So again, I invite you to take some time to watch those. And this is another example of the ongoing reception of a classical myth story, but like the Theater of War project, and the same people are involved in this. These stories are used in a modern setting as a means of social commentary and reflection. So please take the time to have a look at that. And in the next module, we will look at the emergence of a new sort of hero in the later Roman period, especially with the rise of Christianity.